What do you say, man? We talk about some sports.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm happy you had a great Father's Day. Enjoyed some time with your father. Took your son up there and just had a 3 generation Father's Day, which is fantastic. And it sounds like you're in the midst of another great week with family. So, but yeah, let's do what we came here for, man, and talk about some big boy sports, right?
100%. Now, I couldn't get my father to subscribe to YouTube, so we're still stuck at our subscriber number, but you know what? There is time for that. So, you and I always talk about topics that are more general. You and I don't think are experts in any sport, and one of the ways in which we have created and constructed this show is so that we're not that. So there were some trades that happened in the NBA that really got me to thinking about athletes and how all of the paradigm of sports works. And I think that every single season, no matter what sport it is that you watch, basketball, football, baseball, hockey, players get traded all the time. And I think we see that as how is it going to benefit or hurt my club, whatever side of the equation that you're on. You think of it that way. But in the NBA, Chris Paul, I'm sure you're familiar with him. He's been in the league for a long time. He got traded twice in 1 week. He got traded from the Suns to the Wizards and then the Wizards to the Golden State Warriors. And I don't remember which one of these trades he found out on an airplane, but he found out mid flight on the way to Good Morning America. And I think this happens a lot, where with our social media presence and the news cycle being so fast, these players are finding out before their clubs are even telling them. And I wanted to talk about that and maybe see if we can chew some fat here on this because it's an interesting thing to think about in our jobs. Like if you and I were out doing something for our job or representing our job and we found out that we were traded to some other company, but our boss didn't tell us that. We found out on social media. We found out in the news. And I think it's interesting. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that and how you would actually handle this if you were the athlete in this case.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that I see it from a few different perspectives. The one is you should hear it directly from a member of the organization. That's the way these things should happen. What prevents that from happening is, like you mentioned, with the news media cycle and social media, and you have with the nature of that these days, you have these reporters who always want to be the first with the scoop, right? And the second they get any sort of, even if they don't have hard confirmation, they're running with these stories, right? I think the days of where you tell someone like, hey, this is what's going to happen, but let me handle it first, and you can report on it after that. Like those days are gone, right? I don't think that exists anymore in most cases, because everyone wants to be the first one to break a story. On the other hand, from the athlete perspective, while that sucks, and we talked a while back about some of the scheduling and how it's hard on families, which it is. I think that you could also look at the way these guys are compensated, though, and say, you know what, like that's the trade off. You're paid millions of dollars to play this game. The trade off is the fact that you could have your entire life, and that might be a little dramatic, but your entire life uprooted, moved to a city on the other side of the country in the snap of a finger, or released for that matter. I mean, there's a number of things. You could be forced to play on Thanksgiving and Christmas Day and your kids' birthdays and all these other important family events that may pop up or life events. And not in all cases, but in many cases, the trade off is millions of dollars. I don't know. I think with every job anywhere, you got to take the good with the bad, right? We all do that. I think whenever someone I think comes on like changing jobs, whenever you're considering leaving a company or whatever, yeah, you look at the things like, um, the hours, the salary, the benefits, but then you have to also look at what are like the things that you can't account for that you have as a part of this job, right? That maybe you wouldn't get away with or have at this other job. Maybe it's, the coveted flexibility or whatever, whatever other little odd intangible things there are that exist at your current job that wouldn't exist at others. Yeah, that's the kind of way I look at you know, jobs like you and I have. You'd think about them in that fashion where when it comes to pro athletes, like I said, the salary, the stardom, obviously the exposure gives you opportunity for endorsement deals, everything else. Apparently being a professional athlete qualifies you to be a political and world expert on things. So there's a lot of benefits that come from being a pro athlete, and I think that's just the trade off, man. You got to take the good with the bad. There's bad with every job everywhere, and that just happens to be one of the downsides of being a pro athlete.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, the other side of that coin, and when we did the draft a couple of years ago, we had a guy, Myron, who was on with us, and he's trained a lot of guys like Stephon Diggs and Vernon Davis in the NFL. And he talked about how when guys are drafted or traded, how much of an uprooting it is in terms of their lifestyle. And think about a young kid coming out of college, and he used the kid from Mississippi State. Where is Mississippi State? Starkville, Mississippi, right? Some super small college town in the middle of a state that not many people live in or know much about unless you're from that area of the country. And then he gets drafted by the LA Rams and he's out to LA, right? And he's got to find a place to live. He's got to find out where he's going to get all of his groceries. He's got to basically reroute himself to another area. And I understand it's inherent to the job, but there are certain aspects of it that are difficult. And when you get traded mid-season or in the middle of a tenure in a place, you become accustomed to living somewhere. Now, Chris Paul is a veteran athlete, so he knows this comes with it. It's part and parcel with being an NBA star. He's been traded numerous times before. This is not a big deal for him. But a lot of these young guys who are trying to make it somewhere, and then they get traded, and this is their next chance to try and make it. And I think about all of the things that come with having to uproot yourself. You know, you and I live in the same area. We live in a stable place, right? We're probably not going to be told that we have to go somewhere else. And now people do have this in their job, military and other types of jobs like that. And I just think that this part of it is fascinating. And I wanted to get your thoughts on guys like Victor Wembanyama, who got drafted number one overall in the NBA draft. He's coming from France and he's going to be playing in San Antonio, Texas. Completely different. And that has to be difficult. And I think that we don't take that into account enough when we then place expectations on these players. So when they get drafted or traded to your team, they're seen as you're going to help this club. And we kind of forget about a lot of that stuff. We don't talk enough about it. So I wanted to bring it here and talk about it because I get it, what you're saying. It's part of it. You get paid a lot of money. Not all of them get paid the big bucks, though. I mean, they get paid more than we do, but they don't get paid the big bucks. Like they're not Chris Paul, who's set for life. They are trying to make it, or let's say in baseball, they're minor leaguers. They're getting paid like 38 grand. And then they have to go play in some other bumfuck city somewhere and try and make the big club. I think it's just something we need to recognize a little bit more. And these trades made me think about that.
Sure, the people that it happens to the most are probably those that you're talking about, like the league minimum guy, right? The journeyman that is the 10th, 11th guy on a bench that's been on 15 different teams. Those are probably the guys that happens to the most, and it would have the most serious impact on those guys because of their financial situation. And, those guys are just scrapping to stay on a roster most of the time. At the end of the day, like, it's not, it's not like this was, I don't know how, if you would say, what I want to say is, it's not like this is their only option in life to generate an income, right, and make a living. They could have chosen to do something else. I mean, because it's not like this catches people. It shouldn't catch people off guard. You kind of know what you're signing up for when you get into this kind of thing. Now, that doesn't make it easy though either, and I'll say that. So I don't want to come across as too crass about it. But
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
grow up, whiners.
Yeah, boomer. But shouldn't they find out from the teams though? Like
Yes.
this thing with breaking news. Like I respect Adam Schefter. I respect Adrian Wojnarowski for what they do. They have contacts within the league, and they've been doing this for a long time. But this need to be first. Like I guess in my mind, what does Adam Schefter benefit from being first out with some of this news to the detriment of whatever player it is that's on the other end of it? And I just that part of it I don't really understand in today's world. And I guess it's because the news stream it moves so fast. So we get our news at the drop of a hat. Like today, when I'm scrolling through Twitter trying to figure out what we're going to talk about, I see this whole NFL gambling thing. And I'm like, it moves so fast that this will be old news by the time we record about it because I don't want to talk about it this week. You know what I mean? Like, it'll be like, oh, we forget about that and move on. And I think that the team should be the one telling them. But I don't know how that works, man. How do you think that that works? Do you think that the team has made this decision? It goes down to the league office, and some mole in the league office tells one of these reporters, and they report out on it before the team can even have a chance? Or is it really an orchestrated dance between these teams? And they don't really care about telling the player. They're fine with the player finding out via social media or via the news.
My assumption's always been that these guys have sources within the organization. So in Chris Paul's case, like, you wouldn't even have to have a source within he was traded twice in a week or something. You said you wouldn't even have to have a source with whoever was trading him. I mean, it could be from who he's getting traded to, right? I mean, it could be a source there that lets the cat out of the bag, I guess. And you kind of asked like, what's the point of being first? I think in today's age, it's well, hey, like Adam Schefter, like, why are we paying you if so and so reporter is always breaking the story first? Well, we don't need you anymore because the story's already out there, and so I think maybe it's a deal with website traffic and things like that. It generates, the clicking the link, going to the page, that whole deal, being the first to capitalize on that initial wave of traffic. And so if you're not, I would guess that from guy one to guy two, number one and number two in these cases, that the difference in traffic it generates is probably substantial, possibly, and that may be all the difference. That may be all it takes. If Schefter's not out there getting the scoop before everybody else, then you're going to get rid of him, and you're going to go pay the guy that's got the most sources. Pay him to come do it for you.
Which is what we're setting ourselves up for when some of these big time sports podcasts and sports shows, end up retiring. We're going to take over. But this wasn't something we were planning on talking about, but I just thought of it as you were talking about this. But we hear a lot about these players who falter because they never really adjust to the lifestyle of playing pro sports. And this really is more for players that get handed a lot of money. They come from nothing and they get handed a lot of money instantly, and they fizzle out in the league because the lifestyle hits them like a ton of bricks. Do you think that the leagues do enough, or the teams themselves individually do enough to teach these kids, and a lot of times they are kids, how to basically become a celebrity and live the pro sports life? Or do you think that that's something, much like in our education system, what we're not preparing athletes for, and we're not preparing kids for either, on what the real world is going to be like? Do you think that that needs to be addressed more within these leagues, or are they doing a good enough job as it is?
I I don't know. I know that they do. I know, like in the NFL, at least, that they have kind of education courses they give to these rookies and things about trying to manage their money and stuff like that. To what extent, for how long, I have no idea. But I have a question for you. Okay,
Yes.
if you walked up right now on the street to an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, let's just leave it there, 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, and said, try to tell them anything. What are the chances that that person's going to listen to you? Let alone if that person's got $10 million in their bank account that they didn't have yesterday.
No, that's a good point. I mean, that particular demographic and age bracket is notoriously stubborn. I mean, think about the two of us at 18 to 20. Like, what would happen if we were told something that we didn't want to hear, or that maybe didn't fall in line with what we want out of our life? And you're right. I'm not saying that the players or the kids aren't responsible for receiving the message, and that, but it was just I wondered if the leagues were doing enough, because it is a big transition and there's a lot of things that come with it. And I'm talking about financial responsibility, making sure that people don't steal your money. You hear a lot of stories about that. These kids getting taken advantage of. And a lot of these kids don't really have the role model or the structure to know whether this is something that they should be watching out for. And that's all that I'm saying is, like, the league has some responsibility, whether it's notifying their players of getting traded, or notifying their players of things that they need to watch out for when they come in the league. I think that it is helpful, especially if you're coming from a completely different culture, which is why Wemby, as we're going to call him, because that name is way too long to pronounce multiple times in the same show. And he's coming from France to San Antonio, in which they've had multiple international players, right? So the Spurs, Greg Popovich, are uniquely qualified to handle that, especially since they had Tony Parker, who was from France. So it's easier transition because they've set that thing up. Not a lot of other teams do that. I would venture a guess that the New York Jets probably don't give a shit about where you're from. They just want you to play, which is why that team perennially sucks, because they don't do a lot of the soft skills to actually help their players out. But I digress.
Shots fired at Old Cleve. Shots fired.
No, no, no,
Um,
no, no, not no, whoa, 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 hey, 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 not at Cleve, my man. Okay, Cleve is not a member
Cleve's
of the New York Jets. He
Cleve's
does
team.
not. It is
This,
Cleve's team, but he has said these things before. He knows this. If you're a Jets fan, you know this. You know that you can't trust your team. Stu Gatz on the Dan Levitard show always says, I hate them because they never do the right thing. So they're an example of an organization that maybe doesn't take those things seriously. But